Hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from today. Welcome and thank you for attending today's Altair Global webinar, How to Ensure Your Benefits Don't Fizzle When Real Estate Markets Sizzle. Thank you for taking the time out of your Wednesday to join us on this topic. Before we begin, I'd like to take a quick moment to address a few housekeeping items. Please be advised that your phones have been muted by our phone system and you are in listen-only mode. However, it's not a bad idea to go ahead and make sure your phones are muted as well, just for good measure. We do encourage you to submit questions to our speakers throughout the duration of the webinar. And if you have any questions during the presentation, please submit it in the question and answer window on your screen. We'll do our best to respond to each question at the end of the session. This webinar is being recorded and it will be available in a follow-up email after the webinar has concluded. If you have to jump off for any reason, you can catch the rest of this session in the recording. You can also download today's handout in your GoToWebinar control menu for printing and following along. Lastly, this webinar has been submitted for continuing education credits through Worldwide ERC and HRCI. Those activity IDs will be shared with you at the end of this webinar. All right, let's get this started. Our first speaker on today's topic is Mary Beth Nitz, Vice President of Global Consulting Services here at Altair Global. You can read more about Mary Beth's nearly 30 years in the mobility industry here on the screen, as well as her numerous certifications. But today, Mary Beth, I wanted to ask you if you could share with us. You actually have some recent personal experience with today's topic, isn't that right?
I sure do, Sarah. I have some recent experience with one of the items that John's going to speak to, which is the flight to space. That I'm very excited to hear his insights on. But my family and I actually relocated locally during the pandemic last November. We only moved about 5 minutes away from our old house, but bought a house with more space and a pool in the backyard for our 3 kids. So we're a perfect case study of that particular issue that John's going to touch on a little bit later.
That's incredible. I mean, that's impressive. I can't wait to see how that plays into what you have to talk about today. And I'll actually go ahead and turn it over to you to introduce John.
Great, thank you. Yes, it is my pleasure to introduce John D., as we affectionately refer to him. John has 25 years in the relocation industry, and obviously he is a subject matter expert on this topic. He is Executive Vice President of Relocation for At Properties. And John, you as well have a vested interest in our topic today, given that you are actually a landlord in your own right. So tell us a little bit about that and how that might play into our discussion today.
I am, Mary Beth, and thank you very much, everyone, for having me on. And you are the perfect case study. I couldn't have picked someone better because you didn't flee to the hills. You did just the amount of space that you need. But yes, I've got about 15 properties in Chicagoland, so I've kind of lived it a little bit firsthand, and I've been very fortunate. I've got one person in eviction right now, but I'll touch on that when I talk about how I think that's going to change the market and start to open things up a little bit and help us equalize. So I'm looking forward to that section.
Fantastic. Lots of personal insights coming from both of us today, so that's good. So I think we're going to kick everything off with our very first polling question, nothing like going straight out of the gate on that. And we'd like to hear from our webinar attendees today. In what location are your employees feeling the heat of the current housing market? If you could just select one of the options on your screen, and everybody can go ahead and vote in this poll right now. Your options are the Pacific Northwest, specifically sort of the Seattle area, Silicon Valley or the San Francisco Bay Area, the Northeast, Midwest, or the South. And I would be honest, having to pick one of these, I think I'd have a hard time. I live in the South, so certainly I can definitely relate to that. And I know, John, you're sort of more in the Midwest, so I'm sure you can relate to that personally.
Indeed.
All right, so it looks like we have about 60% of our participants today that have voted, so we'll keep the poll open just a little bit longer, and then we will share out the results, and then we'll kick off the content from there. Looking forward to seeing how this all plays out.
Yeah, and Mary Beth, the there's no wrong answer is exceptionally true, especially given the
That's,
areas that people have to choose from.
yeah, that is correct, 100%. All righty. Wow. Okay, I'm going to be honest. I'm surprised by this. Looks like a lot of individuals have indicated the South is an area where they're seeing employees feeling the heat of the current housing market. And kind of surprising, our Silicon Valley, San Francisco Bay Area is not even in the top two, only in there at 16%, and Midwest coming in at 26%. So wow, these are, to me personally, some really interesting results. So this makes me even more excited to dive into our topic today. So John, I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, well, I think it's everywhere, so it may be a lot of where the clients are. When I said there's no wrong answer, when I'll talk in a moment about some hot markets, we whittled that down from like 150 hot markets. They're all over the place. But I'm not too surprised that it's the South, because in real estate, we kind of call it the New South, and like say North Carolina, South Carolina through Tennessee down through Texas. That is just in Atlanta. Those areas have just been so on fire lately that it's been simply incredible. So, there are very few zip codes in America that didn't appreciate last year. I live in one, which might be a nice side note a little later when I talk about the city. But yeah, it's happening all over the place.
Yep. Very, very interesting. So, taking off from the poll, that's really the first thing that we want to hear from you about, John, is what hot markets are you seeing the most activity in now? And I know there's a few that you're going to be touching on. So I'm actually going to hand it over to you to kick us off to talk about some of those select hot markets.
Sounds great. Well, as I mentioned, they are really all over the place, but I did a little snapshot of 4 kind of general areas that I think some of your clients may have some movement in and out, and they're very indicative. Maybe they're like A+ examples of what's going on. So Seattle, Nashville, Greater DFW, and then Silicon Valley. So we'll start with Seattle and Nashville, which will be the next slide. And, you're seeing incredible average sales price. So up about 40% in Seattle. That is going to be paired with inventory down 40% and the sold units up 52%. The days on market is 9. So a week and a couple days. It's very difficult to not sell your home above list price in a Seattle, and that's an area that is a little bit landlocked based on the geography and based on where people want to and need to go. And that's another thing that kind of plays into it. Nashville, maybe not quite as crazy, but Nashville has been seeing huge appreciations for the last 5 years. So the fact that they went up 20%, remember they've probably gone up 50% in the last 5 or 6 years. So you're at 1.1 months of inventory, which is a record low. The MLS in Nashville, since it started, has never had an inventory that low. Your typical multiple offers are 20% plus. And what was surprising, and I talked to Bob Parks, which is a great partner of ours in Nashville, they're seeing a small emerging FSBO market for sale by owner, kind of because people are saying, gosh, this is so crazy. I can just put a sign in my yard and I'll be able to immediately sell it myself for big, big dollars. And as we in the mobility industry know, that's not necessarily going to be the biggest dollars or not necessarily going to be the deal that closes. But that is a sign of that market getting a little frothy when you're starting to get the FSBO. That was one of the few markets where I've heard that that's going on. And then if we want to move forward, another 2 markets to touch on that are just crazy is the greater Dallas-Fort Worth, Frisco area, again, with your average sales price up almost 20%. And what's really telling is this inventory down 52%, while your sales are up 36% over last year. A lot of it, and we'll touch on a little later, the cost of building material has gone up incredibly, in particular lumber. So you've got kind of a double whammy of people are wanting to move, yet you've got low inventory, and it's going to be very difficult for the new housing market to keep up with that demand. And then Silicon Valley is just like the sky's the limit. You've got an average sales price up 20% plus in any of the counties that make that up, oftentimes more than that. Days on inventory, you're at about 3 weeks, and your inventory is down, depending on the specific community, from 15% to 60%. But what I think is really interesting, and Mary Beth, I think you're going to talk about it a little more later, San Jose and San Francisco have the largest average home sale profit in the nation in Q1 21. And if you think about it, the IRS limits on having non-taxable appreciation on your home sale are 500,000. So in San Jose, your average is over that. San Francisco, your average is knocking on it, meaning there are going to be tons of people who are making more than $500,000 on their home, which might play into some conversations about home sale benefits, which Mary Beth will mention. And then similarly, San Jose and San Francisco are fourth and sixth largest for average profits, highest profits by percentage in Q1 21. So you've seen a huge spike in that market. And this is really indicative of what's going on across the nation. It's just how much it has gone up. You know, no one expected COVID 2020 to be a banner year in real estate, and it truly was a banner year in real estate. But it's not like 2006 to 2008, which we'll touch on. So that's kind of a overview of some of the hotter of the hot markets, but there are plenty, believe me.
Yeah, so let's hear from you now, John, regarding some just overall U.S. market trends. And I'll just say as an aside, living in the DFW area, the statistics you just threw out do not surprise me. I know that the home just next door to us sold very quickly to a family from California, and they bought it sight unseen. So kind of interesting there. But let's move forward and talk to us a little bit about some overarching U.S. market trends.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Mary Beth. I'm in Metro Chicagoland. We are seeing a number of homes being sold sight unseen. That is not rare, or it's being sold via a FaceTime walkthrough, and it's being sold within a day because people are nervous and it's a multiple offer scenario. But when you do a broad brushstroke for the entire U.S., we have a record median home sale price of $340,000. Now that might not sound like a ton, but remember, we are going from A to Z here. You know, we're going from Arkansas to Manhattan. So the average price of $340,000 is pretty incredible. And what is also incredible is a record home sale average profit of $70,000. Tails a little bit in, San Jose, $575,000, but $70,000 is the median profit on a home is incredible. And existing home sales across the board are up about 20%, which isn't all that different from what we saw when I picked some particular markets. So when you look at it to the entire country, it's about 20%. And this is the fastest pace of home sales we've seen in 14 years. And yes, I do remember 20 minus 14 is 6, as in 2006. But I think the metrics, the reasoning behind that was a lot different. We don't have financial crisis looming. We don't have the mortgage fraud that we had many years ago. So I think we're going to be in for a much more of a soft landing. So I'm not as concerned as I was 2006, 2007, 2008 in terms of how it's going to pull back. Great. So, and what I'm seeing is everything is kind of inching towards stabilization. So we have market forces in place that are going to help equalize the market. And as I mentioned at the top of the hour, the national foreclosure moratorium should be expiring the end of this month. It's been pushed many times. So I'll believe it when I see it. But you don't really have a need for the foreclosure or the forbearance to continue, because we are at record levels for employment, and virtually all the states are very close to 100%, if not 100% open. And I think that's going to cause some inventory to open up and some competitive pricing. And it's just, the individual stories are all a tragedy, don't get me wrong, but when you look at it from an overall point of view, it's something that is really going to help flatten out the market. If you've got someone who had a mortgage of $2,000 and for accurate or inaccurate or true or untrue reasons, took advantage of this forbearance and stopped paying for 6, 7, 8, 9 months, they're now in the hole $15,000 to $20,000. So you're going to have some people who are going to have some strategic defaults that are walking away, or you're going to have some renters who simply did not pay, and they're going to be wiped out. And what's interesting is most of the economists are predicting this will be more in the entry-level homes and condos. And I don't say low end, but more of your entry level. And Mary Beth, that's super important to note, because for any market to continue growing, the piece that needs to open up is the bottom end of it. It's the entry level home. It's the first home, or it's the kid who's buying a condo in New York City or Miami or Seattle, because selling those gives the people who are in those the opportunity to move up and kind of move up the ladder. So it's actually kind of the best area if we are going to have foreclosure and forbearance hitting. And I think any increases in interest rates, if I could put it into the vernacular, they're going to cause people to freak out. They're going to cause people to freak out inappropriately. Right now, I think if someone was offered a mortgage for 4%, they would think it's high. But I've been in this business for a long time. The first home I bought, it was a 10% interest rate, and I thought I was getting the deal of the century, because people were saying, hey, well, I remember 17 and 18%. So even if we go from 3.5% to 6%, 7%, even if that doubles, the true dollar impact is going to be nothing compared to when rates were 10, 11, 12%, which were also a reasonable price to pay for the price of money. And I know you'll talk about that a little bit when it comes to the policy stuff. So I think that those are a couple reasonable levers that are going to help level the market out a little bit, get us a little more stable.
Right. And I think that's great information. And there's probably quite a few people on the phone that are happy to hear that. That are happy to hear that, at least coming from you, definitely a subject matter expert, that, we shouldn't maybe be thinking, oh gosh, this is a replay of 2006. The external factors and all the other factors are not the same. I think that's an important point to make and to remember. So John, moving forward, for the attendees on our call, I know one of the things that is coming up so often for me and my team from a client perspective and consulting with our clients is, what should our buyers and sellers be aware of right now? What should we be telling them? These are challenging markets. So talk to us a little bit about tips for sellers and buyers, specifically if we're talking about employees that are relocating now. What should they be aware of, and what should they be looking out for?
Sure. Well, we'll talk about both sides of the coin, and sellers first and then buyers, because typically in the mobility world, they're going to be on both sides of the coin. They're going to be buying and then trying to sell, or they're going to be selling and then trying to buy. So I would say, from a corporate point of view, to help as much as possible when you are consulting with your transferees, when your RMC is consulting, when your broker partners are consulting, remember, there's big money and then there's a solid offer, right? So it's so tempting when you see average sales price up 20%, 40%, record profits, to just have a transferee go for the big money. Like, oh, well, I'm going to take the one that's 500 because that's better than the one that's 450. Well, there's multiple levers. And the more we can coach transferees on this, know the levers. Hey, cash is still king, and it always will be king. So a cash offer, or a 50% down payment as opposed to a 5 or 10% down payment. Timing flexibility is so important, because you're going to sell your home, but then where are you going to live? So if you're in a situation where you're going to be asking the company to pay for additional corporate housing, et cetera, take a very close look at how do all of these things factor in. As a seller, what you could do is ask for no contingencies, or ask for an option of an as-is rider. Now, an as-is rider doesn't mean you don't disclose any defects or any challenges, and they can still have an inspection, but it's basically saying, I like this, I want to buy this house, it's worth X, and even if it needs some work, it's still worth X, so that you don't have someone coming back and nickel and diming over the boiler, and I thought these were, double pane windows, and they're not double pane windows. Things like that eat up time, not to mention, attorneys back and forth, but that could give you the opportunity to miss out on perhaps a stronger one. And I hate to put it very bluntly, but from an RMC point of view, or corporate, it's an asset to dispose of, and you want to do it with grace and finesse, and make sure that the transferee gets the most out of it. But your kids didn't grow up there, so it's maybe a little easier to look at as, hey, the goal of this, because you're having this opportunity to make this big profit, because we are moving you and we're going to be paying a lot of the fees involved. So let's get a solid offer and let's make this happen. So that's kind of my advice on how to counsel sellers, because they can get the big dollar signs in their eyes. And then, you have to look at the other side of it now when we go to the buyer slide, that you need to know now you're one of those people standing in line before the open house opens. Know your competition, and just know that you are going to have competition. Oftentimes we're in a market where the buyers think it's a buyer's market and the sellers think it's a seller's market. Everybody knows that it is a seller's market right now. So the more we can make sure that when our transferees are buying, they understand that. So, things to consider are you willing to cover an appraisal shortfall of $10,000, of $50,000? If you are willing, if you do have the means, that is something that you can state in the offer, because now you're the one who wants to make the strong offer, which isn't always necessarily the highest amount of cash, but or the highest dollar amount that you're willing to pay. So the norm is multiple offers, and it's offers over list price. That price tag of $1 million or $500,000 doesn't go down in most of these markets. If anything, it's going to be a starting point and going to go up a little bit. And be prepared to bid, and I should write, and lose out on multiple homes. So this is a scenario where it might take 3 at-bats, it might take 5 at-bats. So that's just kind of the both sides of the coin, and I think the messaging is very important to people, because the more they know that before they go on their house hunting trip, the better position they'll be, of course.
I think all of that is such great information. And here I am, I'm taking furious notes, and we just bought a house in November, but you're so right. And it's interesting. And I think we were having this conversation the other day, historically in the past, you'd look at a house and it would be listed at a certain price, and you'd look at that price and say, okay, that's the starting point. Let's come in under it by this much. And to your point,
exactly.
It's totally flipped now. Like the whole landscape has flipped. Now you look at that list price and you're like, okay, that's the starting point. That's the bottom end. Mm-hmm. Where do we go above
exactly.
that? And it's just a complete change in thought.
Yeah, for years, I don't want to say a rule of thumb, but you had a list to sell ratio of 90 to 92% to 95%, depending on the market. Meaning, if it was $1,000, you'd get 900. And now the typical list to sell ratios are all starting at 100. So maybe they're 102, maybe they're 103, maybe they're 105. So yes, it really has flipped.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy. So, okay, so I think the natural progression of our conversation today is there's a lot of noise out there, and obviously we just talked about what do sellers need to be aware of, what do buyers need to be aware of. There's also a lot of noise out there that's not really accurate, and everybody's kind of jumping in on the conversation. So, John, it'd be great for you to kind of help us dispel some of the myths that are floating around out there in this current market.
Sure, that sounds great, because that only makes everyone's lives better as we're all kind of singing from the same hymn book. So, as we take a look at the next slide, I think a lot of it is about where people are moving and where people are moving from. And Mary Beth, this is near and dear to my heart, because I live in the Loop, which is a neighborhood in Chicago that is literally right downtown. I'm looking at the Board of Trade from my building. Everyone has been talking about the death of the city, and people have talked about the death of the city in quotes many, many times in the last 100 years, the last 20 years. That was called premature, and I don't think it's going to happen. Everything is cyclical. So the cities did take a hit, especially the cities that got hit quick and hard by COVID. New York is probably the standout example, right? So it was the most densely populated zip codes that got hit, because that was where people were living. We were not, it was before we had even thought about, is wearing a mask going to help? Is this going to help? While the offices were still open, you had such a spread of COVID. So it was in New York and the San Francisco and the downtown Chicago and the downtown Boston that got hit. But when they were saying everyone's fleeing the city, it's not quite accurate. A lot of these people were people that had means. So they may have bought in, somewhere out in Long Island, or somewhere out in Naperville for Chicago, or somewhere further out in a suburb of Dallas. A lot of times these were second homes, and they kept the first. So you had, of the people affected, a lot of them were white collar, remote friendly. So they were able to go for 6 months or for a year and work at their second home or move in with their kids for a while, but it did not really turn into a long-term thing. And Mary Beth, you're the perfect example, as I said, of the flight to space, not a flight away from the city. The objective is more space. So if you're in the city, that could be moving to the suburbs. If you have a one bedroom, it could be a two bedroom so that you're not falling over your spouse and having two home offices going. It could be from no deck to having a deck to having some outdoor space, or just high density to low density. Like I'm sick of living in this elevator building. I want to live in a 2 or 3 flat where I'm not going to be interacting with people as much. And you can find that in the city. So people move from a very concentrated downtown area into more of a now suburban type, but you move from Manhattan to Brooklyn or Manhattan to Astoria. Or if you're in Astoria, you move from Astoria further out into Long Island. So there was something a little gradual, but it was not a dearth or a flight. As I mentioned, there are very few zip codes that did not appreciate. Virtually all of them are right in the hearts of downtown, mostly northern cities. So the city's not dead. I'm here to tell you that. And then a couple more stats. Yeah.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, well, the next slide has a couple more stats on that.
Well, I think before we get to the next slide, I think we're going to hit our next polling question.
Oh, sure.
And that is, and this is a little easier than the last one. Our participants are not going to have to pick a specific region of the U.S. This is just a pretty simple yes or no or not sure. Are you finding your employees wanting to move out of more urban areas into more suburban or rural areas? And so it's just select yes, no, or not sure. And we'll give that some time so that our attendees can place their vote. And, John, it's interesting. You're absolutely correct. And I know I already said this, that my family and I relocated and it was really for more space. But, one of the factors for us this past school year for anybody with kids has been really volatile and challenging for school children. One of our biggest concerns when we relocated, quote unquote, 5 minutes away, was that we didn't want more change impacting our kids. So it was really important for us to keep our kids in the same schools. And I'm guessing that probably plays a part in that it's a myth that people are just jetting out of the city and out into the suburbs. I would guess there's lots of families that are kind of in that same situation.
Yeah, totally. Obviously, if you have school-age kids and it's not a corporate move, there's really not a reason, God knows who wants to pull a senior in high school, move them right before their last football season, or when they don't get to go to prom at the high school that they had spent 4 years at. So if you don't need to do that, let me tell you from experience, I recommend not doing that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I even my 16-year-old daughter said, yeah, a pool is great, but I'm not leaving my high school. So definitely a trade-off there. I think we are close to closing our poll. There we go. Okay, well, so very, very interesting. Again, I'm completely surprised by our polling questions during today's webinar. 50% answered yes, and then 41% said not sure. And it's, John, I wonder if your last slide and some of your talking points have made people kind of think about that a little more. A resounding 9%, that's it, said no. Very interesting.
Yeah, well, I'm surprised at how many people said not sure. So I think it's interesting. And the interesting thing to me about this question, it says, are you finding your employees wanting to move out of more urban areas, et cetera, et cetera? But I think if the question would say, do you know for a fact that your employees have moved out of more urban areas? That's a whole different question. So are people talking about it? Yes. And does that sell newspapers and articles or, TV stories? Yes, saying people are wanting to move. But then when it gets down to it, are they actually moving? And yes, they may be moving. They're doing a Mary Beth move, which is same school district or same metro, like, the sandwich generation. I'm not going to leave mom and dad. So I might move, from downtown San Francisco into a suburban area, but I still want to be within 40 minutes of mom and dad or of work. So again, some people, it's like the weather, you talk about it a lot. You don't necessarily have control over it.
That's right. Perfect analogy right there. So I think you have a little bit more to share with us around the death of the city being a little premature. So I'm gonna hand it back to you to kind of close this particular theme out for us.
Yeah, just a few things. It's mostly because I didn't want you to think I'm like some huge city advocate, which I am, but I actually did some research on it. So, it seems that the change has really been overstated. So I'll use the Atlas, every year Atlas Fan Lines does a fantastic a poll, and I see it and I see the trends, and I think it's interesting, but that's a slice of America. So, when I tried to do some research, the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal have done a number of articles on it. And what they did is they went to CBRE and they were able to talk to people who were commercial brokers to look at trends. And what I think is fascinating, they went directly to the USPS, to the Postal Service, and checked the change of address. So that's where you see a lot of change of addresses happen, yes, but they happen within the same metro. So yes, vacation markets benefited. Boy, did Florida and Phoenix benefit, of course. But a lot of times the Yankees kept their own homes up north, or, so they actually didn't do a change of address movement, change of address event for the move. And what I think is most telling is the long-term trends have not changed. What I mean by that, comparing 2019 to 2020, the top 10 incoming states were the same as they were the year prior. The top 10 outgoing states were the same as they were the year prior. So that hasn't changed. So I think it's been more movement within metro areas when it wasn't a corporate move, when you had your druthers. So I thought those were some interesting tidbits surrounding that.
Incredibly interesting, great information, and just really eye-opening. It's probably the best word I can use. And I think you did a great job just kind of saying, hey, this is what you're hearing, and this is maybe what you're reading in your news feed, but this is really what's happening. Let's dig in and look at actually what is taking place. So I appreciate that. And as we prepped for this webinar, I probably should have thought twice about following you, because all the information you shared was so great. But I'm going to take it from here and talk a little bit about how companies can support relocating employees. Obviously, that's our focus in terms of our industry, and working with our clients and making sure that the relocating employees are supported as best they can be. I do want to this very first bullet here: marketing assistance being key. So many things that you just said, John, and again I jotted a lot of them down. What's the viewpoint on big money versus a solid offer? What do you need to be looking for as a seller? I don't want companies at this point in time to think, home sale assistance and marketing assistance is as important, because we see our employees just getting multiple offers and they're able to sell quickly and get to the new location. That certainly does not mean that marketing assistance is not key, because they almost need more support, I feel like, right now, and somebody to counsel them and say, yes, that offer is more money, but let's look at the overarching offer itself, and what are all the key components of it to determine if it's a good offer all around versus just a good offer in terms of the money that you're going to be getting. So I do want to push that point. We obviously are getting a lot of questions from clients consistently and constantly. Financial assistance for buyers. What can we do? How can we help our employees that are moving into some of these hot markets, and to your point, are making multiple offers on homes and losing? And so I'm certainly not going to sit here and tout one approach over another, but I do think that it's very, very important to understand the differences in approaches that companies can take. And we're asked a lot for benchmarking in this area. And it's interesting because, we have a benchmark that kind of spans the entire spectrum of, is it cost of living? Is it high cost housing? Is it high cost living? And there's a lot of different approaches that companies can take. There's high cost housing subsidies. Understand the difference between a housing subsidy and a mortgage subsidy. And I'm gonna talk a little bit more about that in just a moment. But what are you really trying to support your employee with? Are you trying to help with the mortgage cost or the mortgage interest rate, or are you trying to help with the high cost of the housing? Consider that probably one of the biggest needs I think that buyers have right now is cash. And you made that point before as well, John. You mentioned, a 50% down payment versus even just a 20% down payment, which historically was common. Consider different sources. Can your employees utilize their MEA, to help with a down payment on a home? If you are moving employees into high cost locations and you have a cost of living allowance provision in your policy, and maybe that's paid out over 3 to 5 years and it's paid per pay period or on a monthly basis, consider the possibility of allowing your employees to cash out their first year of that COLA and take that as a lump sum to support pulling together a down payment and being more successful in making offers on multiple homes or on the home that they really want. And again, I'll just reiterate, determine the ultimate goal of the assistance being provided. That's really the key to it, I think, is where are you really trying to help your employee? Be prepared to be creative if needed. And I just mentioned before we jumped on and everybody came on live, I mentioned to John and to Sarah that daily I feel like we're getting emails from clients saying, hey, we're thinking of doing this. What do you think? It's a little different. It's something we've not done before. And I'll just say, even just in the past 24 hours, I heard of a client of ours that has historically been paying a home sale bonus on a BVO program. And I'm not certainly going to say that that's not the best approach. It's certainly fine to pay a home sale bonus on a BVO program. I'm not always the biggest proponent of that. But what they're working on now is potentially allowing their employees to say, I'm gonna waive my home sale bonus in lieu of additional temp living or additional storage in transit. And so, think about those things. Can you be creative in this way to really support your employees as they navigate this crazy market? And I will take a breath there. I think we are ready to jump into our third and final polling question. And driving right off from the information I just shared, what are some of the ways you've discussed supporting employees moving to and from challenging markets? And your options here, there are 4: housing subsidies / mortgage subsidies, no interest loans or equity loans to assist with purchasing, extended temp living and or household goods storage to allow for more time to secure a property, or loss on sale. And I will say, not to give anything away, this is a little bit of a trick question. I threw in an answer that's a little bit of a trick, but we'll see how everybody votes on this one. What are your thoughts on that, John?
Well, I think I know the trick question, but I wouldn't be surprised if extended and temp living is far and away the most ticked on button there.
I would agree with that. Maybe this will be the one polling question that won't surprise us when we see the results.
It's hard to loan money for less than it's being loaned for these days. It truly is.
Agreed. That's a great point. Yeah. That's a great point.
Historically low cost of money.
Historically low cost of money. Yep. Yeah. So we'll give just a couple more seconds, and then we'll have Sarah pull up the results here. Looks like we only have about 60% of our, here we go. Okay. Let's see. Okay. Well, nice. Hey, we were right. This one isn't surprising us as much as the other two did. Extended temp living and or household goods storage to allow for more time to secure a property. Interesting. Okay. So our attendees, I'll give you guys a virtual clap, virtual applause that a loss on sale was kind of the zinger thrown in there. Because it may be something that people are experiencing now in certain markets, but probably not as prevalent as just struggling to purchase, have the money to purchase in a new location. So interesting, 13% both for housing subsidies, mortgage subsidies, and no interest loans or equity loans. So great to see our audience respond on that. So I'm going to close out this particular theme with just a couple of client case studies. And the first one is right in line with the polling question we just asked, allowing for additional temp living days and or additional household goods storage. And the one I'm sharing here is actually an example of what we're working with a client to put in place. And all of these approaches that are being talked about right now and put into place, of course, these are sort of external from the core policy. These are just, what can we do now, maybe an interim approach or an interim benefit that's being extended. And we do have a client that's actually formalizing, it's going to be an addendum to their program, but is formalizing this provision of additional temporary living days. And they're actually looking at potentially providing upwards of 130 days total. In doing so, though, they want the employees to show that they are placing those offers on homes and losing out within 30-day periods of time. So we are working with one company to kind of formalize that provision and say, yes, we're happy to extend your temp living. We're happy to provide that assistance to you, but we do want to have some understanding and proof that you are making an effort to purchase the home in the new location. Assistance with down payment, and we talked about that a little bit. We actually are working with a company that just sort of revamped their assistance. Now, this is a company that moves a large number of employees into the Bay Area. And John, to your point, you mentioned how high housing costs are there. So
yes,
what they're providing is a subsidy payment to assist the employee in achieving the 20% down payment. And then this is another little zinger I threw in here, and you mentioned this previously, John. You gave a little teaser for this, that specifically in San Jose and San Francisco, you're seeing housing profits that potentially are exceeding the IRS tax limit for the home seller's exemption, the tax exemption, which, as you mentioned, is $250,000, I believe, for a single individual and $500,000 for married. So, John and I were prepping for this webinar, and we said, are we going to see employees coming to their companies and asking them to assist with the fact that the employee may be lost out on some of that tax money because their profit on selling the home exceeded the tax threshold? I personally have not heard this. I've not seen employees asking for this or companies covering it, and nor would I necessarily condone or recommend or suggest that a company should cover this, but definitely something that might come up, right, John?
Delicately put, Mary Beth. Yeah, I wouldn't necessarily suggest opening that Pandora's box. Maybe you could say, hey, can we share in this profit? Maybe 50-50 because we moved you to this high market area that appreciated $500,000. I think it should be looked at as a great problem to have, that you were moved to this area, or you were in this area and you were making so much money on this corporate move, and you wouldn't be moving unless your company has asked you to move and is probably giving you a ton of other benefits, and including real estate commission, et cetera, household goods movement. I'd be surprised if they asked for that. And again, I think it would be a tough Pandora's box to open, because it'd be very tough to close it down the road.
Yeah, I would agree. That would be a hard precedent to set and then pull back from. So yeah, I would agree with you on that.
And
so
I'd also say
Go ahead.
I'd also say now's a great time if you've got a young enough population that doesn't remember mortgage subsidies or buy downs or 3-2-1s. It's a great time to take it out of your policies, because no one currently has experienced it and the need for it in the last 3, 4, 5 or more years, unless it was a very generous policy. So it's a great time to sunset some of those things that would just be, an incredible benefit now, and maybe not a necessary benefit for someone to be able to move.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I definitely would agree with that. We are. Unfortunately, it is sad to think that sometimes our memories are not long, they're not long. We remember short term, but we may not remember long term. And to your point, you brought up the 10 to 17% interest rates, back years and years, decades ago. It's not that far back now that you think about it, but I do think we have been spoiled tremendously over the past several years with the interest rates that we've seen. And I will share too, we've had multiple conversations with clients around that topic, mortgage subsidies and things along those lines, and looking at creative ways to maybe modify that benefit. Just like I was just talking about, how can we modify and be more creative to really help the employee and provide support where the actual need is right now. So I think that is all we have. I believe, Sarah, if I'm correct, we will open it up, if any of our attendees have questions, anything that we can answer, we are happy to do so. I think we've got plenty of time for some questions, so let us know what we have here.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Beth and John. We do have some questions here. And again, like we said at the beginning, please submit any questions, anything you're curious about that has come up in the question and answer portion of your control panel for GoToWebinar. Let's go ahead and start with this one. How are appraisers keeping up with rising prices? John, you want to take that one?
Sure, and believe it or not, that's an easy one. They're keeping up with rising prices very simply because things are selling so fast. There's not the typical lag time of that you've maybe had in the past during a rising or a falling market. So it's not hard for them to get the comps. So, unlike during the recession when there was a falling knife, and I think the appraisers got beat up maybe a little unfairly on not being able to have things appraised out. I think they have some pretty accurate data because it is coming back. It is coming in quicker on what the comps are throughout a community, even though we have a pretty tight inventory. I'll tell you, everyone worries that the appraisal is going to come back super low. Just last week, we had a relo opportunity, and they used two brokers, two companies. Both of us came in at between 8 million and 8.05 million. So it was a very high-end property. And then we were waiting, holding our breath to see what the appraiser came in at, and he came in at 8.5 million. So that surprised everyone. So, the appraisers have the data, and surprisingly, we're not seeing it coming in and killing deals. I don't know, Mary Beth, on your end, if you've got some insight.
No, I would agree with you. In my role, we're not as involved in how appraisals are coming in, but what you're sharing does not surprise me in the least.
Okay, great. We have another one here that's interesting. If interest rates do rise at some point in the near future, should companies consider offering a mortgage interest subsidy or some other interest rate support at that time?
Well, that's a great question, and I'll kick it off, but I certainly will let John speak. And maybe this question came in before we sort of had a little bit of banter on this topic. But as I just mentioned, I do feel like we're spoiled. And John, you made the comment before, like even if interest rates rise up to 4%, there's going to be some people that are sort of going to be in the sky is falling, mood, or have a sky is falling response to that. When in reality, we know that's not the case. And, I would say this, a mortgage interest subsidy, I feel like it's almost a disadvantage to provide that because, let's say interest rates rise to 4% and you have an employee that's looking for assistance because they're coming out of a 2.8% or 3%. Mm-hmm. And so you assist them in terms of buying that interest rate down. And then, a couple of years from now, let's say interest rates go up to 6%, which still isn't truly a sky is falling scenario.
God forbid,
right. But now you've almost pushed your employee into even more of a disadvantage because now they're having to make an even bigger leap from that 3% you've brought them down to versus going from a 4% to a 6%. So I don't know if that makes sense, but to your point, John, I think now is a good time if you have any sort of mortgage interest support as part of your program. I think that money is better well spent in other areas at this time.
Exactly, and you brought up with some background or with some proof extending their corporate housing or giving them a low cost or no cost additional dollars to put down on their down payment. I think that will serve them much better because the worst thing that can happen is you give them a buy down on their 3.5% mortgage and then 6%. What if it goes to 9%, which still isn't all that bad? Then they really can't afford to live in that home anymore. And then you're setting up a whole different set of problems.
Right. And I've also said too, John, and we have a couple minutes, so I'd love your thoughts on this too. When we talk about a mortgage interest subsidy, if you've got an employee that takes out a 30-year loan, and you're buying down that interest rate, and you're going to relocate them again in another 5 years, they're really not even receiving the full benefit of that. Because it's you're talking about a 30-year loan, then you're buying down the interest rate that they're on a loan they're going to pay on for just a few years.
Yes. Yeah. So again, I think it's easy for me to say as a broker, but because I'm not writing the policy or dealing with the policy questions, but great time to sunset that. Bring it back if you need it, but right now it can actually be a detriment, or it certainly won't be appreciated as much as it had been in a different atmosphere, and as it will again someday, whether it's 2 years, 5 years, 10 years from now.
Well, thanks for that. I appreciate that. And Sarah, do we have any other questions that you can share with us?
Yeah, we do. We actually have gotten a couple in here about the same topic here that I'll throw to you on loss on sale. What are you hearing from companies who currently have loss on sale in their policy? However, with homes going for such high prices now, will loss on sale be something to deal with in the future for those employees selling 2 to 3 years from now when the market settles?
Yeah, if I had a crystal ball, I could answer that. I have always said loss on sale is one of those policy provisions that is 100% driven by the market. When times are good like this, we get a lot of questions from clients whether that should come out of their policy. And it's sort of not necessarily, because your employees probably aren't using it right now. But yeah, I would say probably this might be a really good time to look at your loss on sale provision and ensure that it is benchmarked and that it is reasonable. That may happen. And John, I would love your thoughts on this. 3-4 years down the line, you've got somebody who paid $50,000 over list, and the home didn't appreciate, and now there's a loss on sale situation. And if you're going to relocate an employee, that's a benefit that is an employee has the right to ask for. I would say, again, look at your loss on sale provision. You probably don't have employees using it right now, but look at it and make sure that there are parameters in place and that it's tight, for lack of a better term, because it may be something that might have to come into play in the next few years. But, John, as you said, you don't see a sharp decline in the market like we experienced, 13, 14 years ago. So I'd love your thoughts on that.
That is correct. The broker community is really suggesting we're not going to see a huge fall. Will we see a little bit of a pullback? Yes, and in certain markets, but I think it'll be more of a plateau. Where it goes in 5 years, who knows what crises we'll be pulling the levers at that point. But I don't see a big pullback coming. I see the prices flattening out, maybe pulling back a little, but certainly not to the extent that you saw in 09 to 12, which is great, right?
Yeah. And the other thing I'll throw out there just made me think too, looking forward a few years, it's always good to have a mechanism in place that if you are going to relocate somebody, there are tools out there, often through an RMC potentially, but to do an upfront, like a pre-move, home sale cost analysis for an employee. So, if you're talking about a relocation and you've got somebody and it's a questionable situation in terms of how that might turn out, do an upfront analysis before that move is even authorized, or before deciding 100% that employee is going to move, so you have an idea of what you're going into, and then you can kind of pivot and adjust. And if there needs to be a policy exception or something along those lines, at least going in, and it's not something that hits you in the face in the middle of the move when everything else is going on that you're having to address and deal with.
Okay, great. And I think we have time for about one more here. I think this one came in maybe a little earlier. How is the price of lumber affecting new home costs and delivery?
I'm happy to jump in on this one. In a word, adversely, particularly in areas that don't really rely on much stone or brick. So I'd say maybe the Northeast is a little less affected by it. But, it's interesting. I had actually run some numbers on this for a broker group that I'm in not long ago. When we were walking into the pandemic last year, price of lumber was $700. Last month, it peaked at $1,700. So that is, not quite triple, 2.5 times an increase. And it's dropped a couple $100, but it's still, hovering around the $1,450, $1,500. So, obviously, that is making a tight situation tighter, or a bad situation worse, depending on how you want to phrase it. So, on top of all the other markets, things that are working on low inventory, increased average sales price, it's true. It truly is tougher for the builders because they've got significantly increased costs, which they're going to pass on. So it has not helped.
Yeah, and John, I'll just add on to that, and I don't know if you can comment. Obviously, I know DFW is one of the areas that you highlighted in your hot markets, and it's almost like the perfect storm here because we're dealing with that anyway. But then you add in the horrible ice and snowstorm that we had in February, and so many people having to remodel and rebuild and redo homes because of that. It just exacerbates that situation that much more.
We're coming out of a non-typical year. That is the understatement.
And going into a non-typical summer.
Yes, exactly.
So, Sarah, I think you said maybe one more question. I think we have just a couple minutes that we could answer.
Yeah, I think we can squeeze one in, and this one seems interesting. Evelyn asked, are companies still offering GPOs?
So, and again, I'll take a shot at it and then certainly let John comment. We do still see GPOs. I don't think GPOs are ever going to go away. I do feel that they have become more marginalized and are probably more used for key talent, executive relocations, and, the only area where I might say we might see more of those coming into play would be in situations where you want to try to establish a value of a home in order to provide some sort of equity loan or equity advance. But you don't necessarily have to have a full-blown GPO program in place in order to do that. So definitely do not see GPOs, from my perspective, as prevalent in relocation policies as in years past, and this is going back many, many years. It's dwindled more, but definitely I don't think we're ever going to see GPO go away.
Beth, I would echo all those comments. So, and we're in 4 metros, my company, so I'm kind of seeing different markets as they rise and fall and changes happen, but a steady decrease in them, yes. Whether that's 20% to 30%, depends on the market. But, it's more for the VIPs, as you mentioned.
Absolutely. Yep. We are in line on that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all for your questions. I do see a couple that are in here, but for the sake of time, we want to make sure to end on time here and get you those activity IDs for continuing credits. So any question that hasn't been answered here will be answered in a follow-up email. Speaking of those credits, as we mentioned, this webinar was approved for HRCI and GMS CRP credit. Those activity IDs are listed here on your screen, as well as in that downloadable handout for your convenience. So if you can't jot it down here, feel free to download that handout. You can plug it in at a later time. And from all of us at Altair Global, we know your time is valuable and we appreciate your attendance in today's webinar. Thanks all for attending and have a great rest of your day. Thank you, Mary Beth, and thank you, John.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.